begin if that's all right. So it's about 2 minutes after. So I'll call to order the April 19th meeting of the Parks Recreation Forestry Commission. You have a roll call, Matt? Do you have everybody in attendance?
I do.
Okay, so we don't need to do that. So look at approval of minutes from the last meeting of April 5th. I would recommend a motion to accept those minutes as submitted.
Okay, this is Sue. I move that we accept the minutes as submitted.
All right, thank you, Sue. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Aaron, thank you. Any corrections, additions, deletions? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of accepting the minutes as submitted, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, thank you. Next order of item of business is number 2, guidance in the Memorial Tree Program. Mark, I'll set that at you for the moment, or Matt.
I know Mark is joining us. He's just coming in from the waiting room. So I'll start kind of the base of this. I know Mark's talked to a lot of our neighboring and peer communities on what they do on these. And now that he's available, I'm going to let him kind of take the lead here.
All right, Mark, go for it. Oh, he's muted. Mark, you're muted.
Come on, there you go.
There you go.
Hey.
And I like your top of your head, but the rest I can't see.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to work the keyboard here before I sit back. Okay, all right.
There you go.
Now you can see me in all my sweaty glory. Sorry, I just
Yeah, thank you.
squeezed in a bike ride quick before the meeting started. All right, so essentially, you know, if you read the memo, that's really the gist of it. We have had the Memorial Tree Program that was a relic before my time started, that we haven't had a lot of use in the last number of years in terms of people wanting to purchase a tree for Memorial Tree Program. And really throughout the whole course of the program, not only the tree, but the bench one as well, no real surprise, there wasn't a heck of a lot of thought put in for the long-term care or responsibility regarding these types of memorials. Meaning that there's nothing spelled out in terms of what if something happens? What if the tree dies within the first year? What if it dies in the next 5 or 10 or 15 years? Is there any difference between what causes that tree death? Is it a quote unquote act of God, whether it's, you know, a tornado or a flood or a disease or an insect infestation? Essentially, if something happens to that tree, who's responsible for what, if anything? And what's really come to light and precipitated this really is the flood of 2018. And around Tiedemann Pond, with all the flooding there, we had a large number of trees die. And some of those were memorial trees as well. And so the thought has been, or the request has been made that, well, hey, you guys are, this is a memorial tree, you're responsible for it. And I don't know if I completely agree with that, to be honest with you, because it is something that was beyond our control. Those trees had been in there for a number of years. And I don't know if we should really, for not to be inconsiderate at all or anything, but if we should be on the hook for ever and a day because this is a memorial tree. So asking what your guys' thoughts are, just anecdotally, I asked around today, Dane County, their memorial tree program, they are actually in the process right now of revamping theirs as well. A lot for the same reasons, completely independent. They're like, oh, that's very interesting because we're doing the same thing. Their website says one thing, but their staff says that what the website says really isn't the truth in terms of what kind of care has been going on with that. The city of Madison, they actually discontinued their memorial tree program entirely, in large part for these same type of reasons. And one person I talked to actually said that one of their major problems is there wasn't adequate tracking throughout history for what was a memorial tree. And they actually had some park projects where trees were cut down because of the park project. And then, of course, as soon as those trees are cut down, people are upset because, hey, those were memorial tree that were planted 20 years ago.
Mhm.
So that's kind of what's been happening around here, other communities in terms of memorial trees. So I just wanted to see what your guys' thoughts were on it, mainly because I guess I didn't want to be on my own island for that.
Sure. I guess I need a little more information on this program. If somebody wants to do a memorial tree, is it the idea that they can put any tree they want anywhere they want? Or is
No.
there guidance from you as saying, here's a tree where we really need a tree and maybe you'll pay for it?
The way it's worked is the recipient does request a particular location, and I'll try to make that work. And then with that said, then we try to match the right tree with the right place. And then the person pays for that tree, we plant it, and then there is a plaque that goes along with that tree.
Yeah.
For the most part, I would say probably 60-40 in terms of percentage between what gets planted in parks and what gets planted in conservancy lands areas.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of cost, because of the way that it works in terms of inability to really guarantee for long term, I haven't really been putting a lot of dollars to it. So honestly, it really has just been bare minimum in terms of the cost of the tree, the cost of the plaque, and just a couple hours of staff time to get it in the ground. As with street trees, really for the most part, in terms of guarantee, there pretty much is the first year or 2 years in terms of after planting for any kind of guarantee, because that's what we get as well for street trees. In terms of if the tree dies within the first year, then we try to go back to the nursery and say, hey, what's up? But after that, it's kind of, that's it, and it's on its own.
Yeah. But you have like five, you've only had 5 of these over 5 years. I mean, where are most of these planted? I know 1 or 2 are on Tiedemann's. That's all I know of.
Tiedemann, there's some over by Parisi Park. There's some in the wooded area back over in the one back corner. There's a few memorial trees over at Lakeview Park. And then conservancy wise, there's one over at Graver Pond. There's 1 or 2 up in Middleton Hills and outlet 63, 64.
No, that's 5. That's more than 5 right there. So
well, that's more
That's
than the
about
last
5.
5 years though too.
yeah, okay.
That's what I know of in my 11 years of being here.
Sure. Okay.
So Mark, what's the average cost of a tree to plant?
Depending on the kind of tree, obviously, but we really basically state, as with our street trees, purchase and installed about $350 will get you the tree in the ground with the plaque.
Keep going, Mark. You're on a roll here.
Well, no, it just doesn't seem that it's worth the aggravation not to replace it.
Yeah.
Right.
I understand that. I guess I just don't know. This is sure we got it now, but do we want to keep with that type of policy, or do we want to say, from here on out, this is the kind of the understanding for it, so that we're not running into something like this every time we have some kind of event come along and knock some trees out.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't look at it that way, right? So take that policy and look at your street trees, right? If I have a flood on my street and it kills a terrace tree, the city's going to come and replace it. May not be right away, but the city's going to come and replace it. If lightning strikes my tree in the terrace, the city's going to come and replace it. How is it any different than for a memorial tree?
I guess some of it might be the placement of it. Like in the case of Tiedemann Pond, would I really put an emphasis on putting trees back along Gammon Road like that? Honestly, I wouldn't. So, that was where it was chosen to be at that time. But I think it wouldn't be my first choice of where to put trees.
So, but I'm not suggesting that you give up that prerogative, right? So obviously, times change. If I decided to donate a tree to the city and I'd like it to go in Orchid Heights, but then we decide to pave Orchid Heights, I would understand that you'd want to move that tree if it dies. I'm just worst case hypothetical stuff, right?
Mhm.
I don't know that that's, the city would not go out of its way to kill a tree, any kind of tree. But if it happens as an act of God, I think that, then the whole placement issue comes back for discussion, right? If it's not the right place for that tree to be, then you pick new places. But I guess I'm not getting past the fact that we should probably replace the tree if it dies.
Yeah, I guess I concur with Mark on this, that, I would presume you have some control over where they place the tree. And if they wanted to place a tree where you never wanted a tree, I think it's within your purview to say, sorry, thank you for the offer, but we really can't have a tree there. But once you define on a mutually agreeable tree place, if it was a city tree and we put it in, we would replace it. And it seems to me it's a small enough program that maybe what this really needs is a rethinking and re-looking at the kind of boundaries of what's here, because I think it's a good program. But it seems like there's so few people, we just sort of don't know what to do with it.
I guess for my thought, honestly, really is more in just kind of the guarantee of it lasting. And that's where, to me, it's much more of a natural fit to have it be associated with a bench or something that we know we're not going to have to worry about that particular thing, as opposed to the living aspect type of thing of a tree.
But I take it at the moment, we don't have that kind of thing built into this structure. I mean, it would be easy to sit there and say, we value the program, and for the first 10 years of a life of a tree, we'll replace it, but we can't guarantee it forever. It's natural. So after 5 years or 10 years, if something happens to the tree, we're no longer liable for that tree. Or if we need to change the policy of the city, I want to move this tree, we'll work with you to find a different place to replace this, but we can't guarantee it's going to stay right where you put it. I guess when I read through this, I just felt like there wasn't enough clarification of direction. I personally think the program has potential and should probably try to stay, but we should clarify it. I mean, we're not busting the budget on this thing at the moment. Anyways, other people's comments.
I don't think it's so much about budget. It's about having the foresight, because if someone's placing something as a memorial, they're doing it in a meaningful location. They're wanting to know it will last. So I think Mark, thankfully is just trying to look out for that. Is there a way to eliminate like the parks, for instance, like Parisi or Lakeview, that will see ongoing development and have it only limited to conservancy land areas, and then therefore the bench program might be, the greater choice for people?
Yeah.
Because
the other thing that I
not going to see as much. Go ahead.
The other thing I'd want some feedback on is the situation where the city's had a memorial tree location in the past, and staff is now saying this probably isn't a good spot for a memorial tree. It died because of whatever reason. The challenge here is, I think everyone's concerned about, this is obviously a sensitive emotional issue for the family involved trying to recognize a loved one, and staff having to make some very black and white decisions about, is this the best place for this?
Yeah.
And dealing with the sensitivity to the family, because I've been there with the benches, and we've tried to identify locations, and the family's like, well, we really want it here. And I'm like, you can see another bench from that location and try and say it nicer than that. But, I think staff feels with these memorial programs that we have to play part social worker. I'm not saying that we can't, but you're trying to make professional based decisions on what's an emotional issue for the families involved.
Yeah. I mean, part of the other side of this is the people who are doing those donations clearly have some sensibility about the parks and about the trees. You know, they're not giving the money to build a bowling alley. They have some, and so there's some value, you know, to the long-term sense that these are supporters of these parks, and they have valued them in probably in many ways. So, I mean, my own feeling. Oh, go ahead, and other people.
Just let's clarify the issues here. Are we talking about a replacement policy for the current trees and discontinuing the future program? Is that the option that you're suggesting?
Well, there was that thought. I mean, I could also, based off of what you guys are saying, offer an alternative and say, all right, like we will continue to replace existing ones, grandfather them in, if you will, but then modify the program to say in the future that memorial tree planting from here on out has an understanding that we will replace them within the first 5 or 10 years after planting. But then after that, it's kind of debatable. Or honestly, like I said in the memo, for a memorial, I honestly do like the thought of having it tied to some part of hardscape where I know without a doubt it's going to be there for 20 years, aka a bench, and I'm not going to have to worry about anything about that.
Well, but you're also talking about a forestry program, right? So is the option you can have a bench or you can contribute to the forestry program, but if you have an existing memorial tree, we'll replace it once.
I'd be fine with that too. I guess the biggest thing honestly is I just don't want to get tied into something where because of where it is or something like that, that it's going to be something where we're replacing memorial trees over and over again. Because I guess you guys are right in that the emotional aspect of planting a tree is that the romantic notion is you're planting this oak tree that's going to live for 250 years and be this long-lasting memorial for grandma or grandpa. And I'm sorry, as an urban forester, I would love to have that happen, but I also know the realities of urban forestry and the chances of trees lasting that long are slim enough.
So then what's the average life of an urban tree?
Well, there's definitely a huge difference between a street tree and a park tree. Park trees, I think you can definitely be pushing maybe 50% at most of what a species particular lifespan is. But, you know, we put a lot of strings underneath the tree in terms of not only just the planting of it, but mowing around it and vehicles and vandalism and kids and everything else like that too. So, you know, it is an unknown. It really is in terms of that the odds are stacked against a tree, unfortunately. And I can deal with that for a regular park or street tree much, much better than having that emotional bond tied to it because it's a memorial tree.
So I'm hearing, if I could speak, or I can't speak for everybody, but the sense that I don't hear a hue and cry that this program should disappear. I think you've got an issue where you have a program where you planted trees, 5 of them in the last year, for which there was no set of guidelines. So for us to invent guidelines seems problematic after the fact.
I think he's looking for guidelines moving forward. And
pardon me?
I said, I think he's looking for guidelines moving forward. We obviously
right, but I think one of the questions is, should they replace the existing trees that are already committed? And I think the answer is yes, because we never said we wouldn't.
Right.
For the going forward, I think that to completely kill off the program has some downside. I would like you guys to sit there and look at coming up with the kind of guidelines that you could live with that would allow a program to be there, but would set the guidelines so that before anybody gives their money, it already fits what you think is good for that.
I will speak just to my personal experience with this is that my family had a tree planted for my cousin that we lost while she was at UW-Madison, and the amount of replacement and stuff that we have been through in like the 10 years after that, it's hard for families, and it kind of, you know, like Matt spoke to with the emotional part, it really brings kind of, you resurges, you know, the event over and over again. So I think that both for the city's obligation and, you know, in respect to the families, it might be good to create something moving forward that's either guiding it towards something like a bench program that could last longer. Those are easy to relocate, and it doesn't also infringe on the city's plans for developing our already limited parklands when a family wants it placed, you know, in a park that we have plans to renovate and move around in the next 10 years. So those are my thoughts based on my experience.
Well, good comments. Other comments?
Well, I think
No.
that even for the current memorial trees, sorry, Jim, we need to have some sort of limit on these things. I mean, we can't guarantee in perpetuity there'll be a tree there. And maybe we extend that out past the 5 years we're talking about now, but I think we still need to have some sort of policy that I just can't imagine that we're going to keep track of these trees for the next 80, 100 years and try to deal with all this stuff. At some point, we have to take them off the books, and you know, maybe 20 years, I don't know. And I think you know, 5 years or something like that may not be exactly what people are thinking about when they're looking to donate money for a memorial tree, but I think it's good to have that expectation up front.
Yeah. Okay, Jim?
So, you know, there were five in a year. If we go at that rate, over the next 3 or 4 years, we could have 15 or 20 memorial trees out there.
It was 5 over the last 5 years, though, not 5 per year.
Okay.
One a year.
One a year.
Yeah.
All right. I was just thinking that if we had a fair number of these things out and the storm came through and blew half of them down, would we be obliged to replace it? If that's the case, then I would say I'd prefer not to see this program move forward.
I think you could write that into a guideline, for a policy guideline, right? You know, the city will replace it within the first 5 or 10 years. You pick a number, and after that, in case of storm or other acts of nature, that, you know, the tree will not be replaced, and people know that going into it, so they can make that informed decision if they decide to proceed with buying or, you know, purchasing a tree for the city.
Yeah.
I think, you know, it's just informing people what will happen, I think is key here, so that, you know, they know all the information and they know what will happen if, you know, or if, you know, an act of nature comes along, or, you know, say that the tree will be guaranteed in a spot unless an act of nature comes in for an X amount of years. And if we need to then go in for some reason and have to remove the tree or whatever, it's written in there that this is going to happen, or that, you know, it's no longer protected.
So let me play devil's advocate for you, Nick, here.
Mhm.
I don't disagree that the city should say that we could guarantee those trees for 10 years, right? Well, what happens in the 11th year? The tree gets hit by lightning and the city's, well, just let me finish, right? The city's done paying for this. Could I then pay to replace it again in the same place? Would I have that option to replace it in the same location? Or does that, you know, the way that you're suggesting, would we have to go through the entire process again? Right. So if I'm the original donor, the tree dies and I want to refund, I want to replace the tree at my own expense. Do I have any equity in the placement, or does that have to go through the entire process again?
Well, I think, Mark, part of the problem is we don't have any guidelines that deals with any of these issues.
No,
That's what
I'm not
looking
suggesting we do. What I'm asking for
Uh-huh.
is Nick, right? Nick wants to go
Yeah.
down this road and say, this is what the limits are. Would he be acceptable to doing something like that in terms of a policy?
I mean,
That
if
makes
it's
sense.
if it's an
just to
active
jump
nature.
in,
Okay, good. Go ahead, Matt.
Nick, the
you
question
know,
is,
I think what I'm hearing, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've gotten a lot of feedback on this and can probably kind of go back and talk through some of these scenarios and like you said, put down things that staff are comfortable with and bring back a revised program. And to answer that specific question, from my perspective, as there'd have to be some sign off by staff saying that that site remains a viable location for a memorial tree.
Yeah.
And provided they wanted to, you know, I don't know if the word re-up is the correct word, but if they wanted to purchase another tree for that location, I think it could be viable as long as staff still feels that's a viable location.
And I was going to kind of say the same thing, you know, if you plant a tree and then all of a sudden you realize, you know, 9 years later that, wow, it's prone to a floodplain or something like that, then the city would have its, you know, the prerogative to say, sorry, we can't plant another tree in this location. But if it's in, you know, a park and, you know, it's in a nice location and, you know, a storm blows it over, I mean, then the city said, hey, that's actually a nice place. You want to have it there again? If they choose to, you know, purchase a new tree, that's what they can do. I think, you know, it's echoing a lot what Matt just said.
No, I think it's good. That's just what I'm getting is I think that I'm not hearing that we want to kill off this program necessarily, but it's clear that the staff has to be comfortable, and it's clear that somebody has to start putting together some boundaries that might make it acceptable so that we could keep it going within a way that the city staff is comfortable. So I personally, I guess, would advocate that's, you got your advice, and I think you got it right, man.
Because I know a lot of what these hypotheticals, you can substitute memorial tree for memorial bench, and those same things apply, and none of it's really been spelled out for memorial benches either. So we have the same thing to do with both aspects. So we will do so.
Well, and to speak to that, one of our issues on the memorial bench program is that we have a large acreage that we manage, you can guess where, that's also managed by Dane County. And one of us has a bench program that's $1,600 for memorial bench, and the other has a bench program that's $4,000 for memorial bench. So you quickly find out why there's so many benches on the city side of the conservancy.
Well, the big question is, what happens if a storm comes through and blows down all of those benches all at once? Do we replace them?
Well, that's interesting you asked that, because think about the creek corridor and what happened in 2018, and we had probably about a dozen benches down through there.
All right. Well, so I'm not hearing that there's a great need for benches either. So.
No, I think what he's saying is that we should be charging $4,000 a bench.
There you go. Even more for a tree.
Well, it does leave the question for the trees too, you know, in terms of long-term replanting. Then do we increase the price of that tree then to build in additional coverage for their 1 or 2 replacements? Because right now it really is just for that one tree.
Yeah.
Or do we say, no, we're fine with the city eating it after that? So, I mean, there's definitely lots of layers to the onion. There's no doubt about it.
All right. Any other comments for
So
the?
John?
Yeah.
What would happen if we just took that donated tree and treated it like any other tree that's planted in the city? And have, you know, have the family know that, yes, you can plant a memorial tree, but it will be taken care of like we take care of the rest of the trees in the city. And if, however, nature deals with the rest of the trees and that tree, it will be included and treated the same as all the other trees.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all fair game. I guess what I think we're saying is come up with some things that you're comfortable with as a staff to make this maybe work, but work in a way that's good for you.
And I'm actually leaning towards more of a concrete type memorial than I am a tree. I would be willing to think about eliminating the program if we only now have 5 or 10 trees in the program.
Yeah. Okay.
All
right.
We'll have options for in the future then.
All right. Any other comments or? All right, I guess.
So do you need
Mark, you have some?
Do you need a motion, or do you have the guidance you need?
I'm taking the, the commission would like to see staff develop something that they feel comfortable with, and it appeared that the majority wanted to see the program continue in some fashion.
Yeah, that's my assessment.
But I think we will likely reach out to maybe not adjacent communities, because it sounds like a lot of them have discontinued or are in the process, but maybe reach out to some other communities in the state and maybe see what's worked or not worked for them as well. So.
Okay. I think we're open to any and all of it, Matt. I don't get this sense that there's a draconian thing hanging over your head here.
Understood.
All right. Hearing nothing else, then let's move on to item number 3, award for bid of stump grinding. Something a little more energetic here.
I'll make a motion that we accept Boley Tree and Landscape Care bid of $69.95.
All right. We have a motion from David. Do we have a second to that motion?
I'll second. Oh,
Go ahead.
Okay. Second from Jim?
yes.
All right, thank you. So discussion. We have a motion on the table. Any discussion? All right, hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, thank you. Moving on. Item number 4, selection of new playground spot in southwestern part of the city. Matt, you've done some work and you've come up with a conclusion.
Well, I'll start on this and
Oh yeah, because you started already.
let the commission discuss. I know there's been a lot of conversation via email on this topic. I think what you're seeing with this issue is this isn't a new discussion. This has been a staff level discussion with planning, city administration, and park staff over the past 3 years. This isn't a new topic. And what you're seeing is there isn't a great solution to this problem. So I think what we're trying to pick is what's the least problematic or the best option to deal with the concern of there not being a playground on this side of the community.
Mm-hmm.
There are significant limitations on all of these sites. What I would say is, in regards, there's been a lot of discussion of site 2 versus site 4. Site 4 is a bowl. It holds water. If you go and look, it's going to be a problematic wet site, and it gives us no, like, so when you talk to playground designers, and again, I've built playgrounds. I've done a fair number of them over the years. I'm not an expert, but I call her friend, but Megan, who some of you have met through Lee Recreation, she is so busy that I had to schedule time to talk to her about this playground, and it took 3 weeks to get a moment of her time, because I try not to talk work when she walks with her kids by my house. But the point is, she does playgrounds for a living, and when she talks about design a playground, they typically, you don't get much longer than you are wide, if that makes sense. So a linear playground, you lose play value when it's spread out over a long linear site. So I just want to try and explain this. So both site 2 and 4 are about 50 feet wide. And that's, you're probably looking at a 50 by 50 playground at either location, is what would be designed. You guys you can decide, you can not decide this evening. It's not going to hurt my feelings either way. If you want, you could suggest that we work with Blake and have him come up with a proposal for both sites. I think anything is on the table at this point, but what I'm trying to convey is neither of these sites are great. They wouldn't be the first choice in any of our normal playground selection. But trust me, when even site 4, the topic of going to the Conservancy Lands Committee and asking them to make conservancy lands into a more active recreation area, which is something they've vocally talked about in at least 2 of their last 3 meetings of wanting to ensure that we're not, that was one of the big topics in the name change of the department, is they're like, you don't want to make conservancy lands more active recreation use, correct? And of course I said, well, no, that's not our intent. That this is about branding and about, community recognition and recreation programming more than it is anything. We don't have any intention of converting conservancy lands to more active park use, because that was their concern in that topic. And so I think it is going to be a very top of mind issue for a lot of the Conservancy Lands Committee of, is that the right message or the right thing to do? And I can't speak for them. I just want to make you aware that if we want to pursue Site 4, that is top of mind as a concern, along with that there's a very bowl shape to that property, and it does hold water.
Yeah, if I could comment, I have 2 issues. One, I went to the site today, and yes, it is a bowl. Doesn't mean you couldn't do some infill or something in there, but you may be looking at the other site as well. I do take issue with the conservancy land thing, and that it's smashed in an industrial area between a bunch of buildings. And we're talking about like 1/8 of an acre that just smashed in there among parking lots and buildings and parking garages. And so to call that somehow a valuable and 10th part of the conservancy lands, that somebody gave that land at some point to conservancy land. My understanding is that once it was going to be a city parking lot, but I don't see that as the most valuable piece of land for conservancy lands to be fighting for. It just doesn't. The path is still there. You wouldn't even remove the path. I just, it's literally an urban little tiny back alley.
So John, I certainly understand your comment. I would think that before you make a hard and fast decision on that, is what would you think if Conservancy Lands wanted to take a piece of parkland?
Yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to, right?
Right.
These committees have their own parochial interests. They are what they are. I think we need to be cognizant of that before we say, yeah, we should take that because we think we have a better use.
I understand that. I'm not in a position to take it, but I think that they would argue for their, we can argue for ours, and that's just part of the discussion.
And I would hope every property be looked at in its own merits and not blanket rules that can't be bent.
Okay.
So Matt, I did have a question about this. Have you talked to Public Works about having them abandon that railroad spur parts of it?
Hasn't gotten that far. Was a conversation with the city administrator, and he was supportive of the idea, but I know it needs to go to Public Works. I know in not specific discussions about exactly this, but Sean has raised concern of is that something that should stay? So it's definitely something that I can go back to Public Works and talk about if they have concern or issues with it, but I have not talked directly with Public Works on this.
You're talking about in terms of staying, whether or not we should abandon the spur or just this portion of it.
From Sean's perspective, he was interested in should the city abandon the spur.
Right.
You might want to know there's been trespassers on there the last 2 days. That the cement company, they have a 10-car train that they didn't know what to do with it. So they literally shoved it onto that spur, and it's sitting on the first quarter of that spur, which is its city property. It's not railroad property, but that car's there. So that made me suddenly think, oh my God,
I'm thinking rent.
Yeah. Other comments, discussion?
I'm going to make a rude comment analogy here, but it seems like we've got some people in the area over there that moved in and are now looking for a park, even though there was no park when they moved in. This seems reminiscent to people who moved in off Airport Road and are now complaining that there's an airport there. I don't see either 2 or 4 as being good locations for a park. And I probably wouldn't be voting for either one.
John, Kathy Olson has her hand raised.
Kathy?
Yeah, this, I guess when we saw the different sites back in March, it didn't have how big they were actually. And when I see the size of this is 2,889 square feet, it really set me back, because I know that the minimum housing lot could be a 7,200, and this is like a third the size of a lot, and it's so tiny. I just don't know how this would work. One thing you've mentioned is there's possibility for a zip line and a natural slide. Would that be included within that 2,900 square feet?
So when I met with Blake and Megan, they talked about using the terrain down the hill slope, so not included in this area. You know, one of the challenges is we've had a lot of interest in zip lines in our playground designs.
Right.
And they take up so much real estate. And the thought here was to use some of that land between the railroad and the trail further to the north that could accommodate that zip line, just because of kind of the uniqueness of the site.
And we got to really remember that, well, this isn't the end of the residential or the apartments that are going to be built out there. There's going to be more. It's not, people don't move in and say, oh, now I want to park. There should be. I mean, they've paid fees. I understand, Mark, where you talked about how you're in no requirement to spend any of that money nearby, but you do kind of get the responsibility. That's where the people are. And that's what Parks and Rec are doing. You know, that's your task, is to make sure that there's recreation available to all the population. And this is a growing area. And these people have no lawns. They need some way to get out and to be able to mingle with other people in the community. That's very important. I feel that this is, I went out there also, and I was like, where could this possibly be? It's really little, little, but I would like to, I don't think that just because it belongs to Conservancy lands, it should be off the table. If Conservancy lands doesn't feel like there needs to be a park in that area, I think the recommendation from Parks and Rec is very important if we were to take it further than that. So thank you.
So I'd like to respond, Kathy. And so let's go back to the beginning here. Part of the development process is that our planning committee works with these developers. Right. And one of those first choices is whether or not the developer wants to donate land for a park, dedicate land for a park, or to pay fees. And our planning committee and our common council have made a series of decisions that says that there's really not usable land in this area for the creation of a park, and has accepted fees in lieu of that. Right? They all are paying park development as well. But this is why, Kathy, you're aware of what's going on the Bruce property, is why the city has gotten to the point now where it is saying that, you know what, I don't want the dedication fees, I want the land.
Exactly. I agree with you. I know exactly what you're saying.
So let's be fair that it has been a successive number of common councils, their iterations, that have agreed with planning and city staff that it is more beneficial for the building than a park.
Right.
And it's only because someone is now complaining about not having a park that this is even up for discussion. The reality is if you can put a swing set on a piece of land and call it a park, I think that's great. But let's not be unrealistic here, that there's really not much out there.
No, but that, Mark, what is, go ahead.
I would just say that, I think we've got to decide if we want a park. I don't think we've got enough land on any of these sites to have the kind of park that we need to serve the amount of development that's occurred. So if we're going to put a playground, I don't have the data and I can easily pull this together. But if we're looking at this as just a playground, that's probably really close to the size playground we have in almost all of our neighborhood and smaller parks. I don't know that we have much bigger than a 3,000 square foot playground in any of our parks outside of the large community parks.
Well, I looked at the mini parks and the smallest one I found was 0.2 of an acre.
But that's the entire park acreage. And what I'm talking about is the actual playground.
Okay,
and again,
okay.
I think there's a question of, are we developing a park? And if that's the question, I think we've got to take a big step back and look at where is that attainable? Because I'm not sure it exists without significant redevelopment and, as Mark alluded, a developer willing to provide acreage, or the city's instance that they provide acreage to do that. But if we're focused on a playground, and that's what I was looking at, that this is roughly probably the size of a playground in our mini or neighborhood parks. We rarely get larger than 3,000 square feet.
Right.
So Matt, what's the size of, what's that, Baskerville? I mean, that's about the smallest postage stamp of a park.
Yeah, I bet we're not at 1,500 square feet there.
So in other words, we're doing great.
No, because Baskerville has problems. It feels uncomfortable because it does not have enough buffer space around it, as this would also not have sufficient buffer space.
I
Well,
understand.
the difference between this and Baskerville, though, is Baskerville's right on Century Avenue, and it's just noisy all the time. You know, Market Street is not near the.
I'm not saying that they're perfect parks. I'm just saying that from a size perspective, this is a vast improvement, right? And I think you're talking about. Never mind. Maybe the answer is that we really need to develop both the bowl and this site, right? Maybe we should be looking at saying, okay, you know what? We don't have an assemblage here, but what we can do is say, you know, this is part A, this is part B.
And I think there's value in that, in saying that, you know, one area is for an older age group and another area is for a younger age group, and look at, you know, like you said, kind of developing one viable site out of these two spots.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good idea because, you know, Kathy, I hear what you're saying, but we're landlocked by decisions long since made. And there is no land, whether we want a park or not, there's no land to do a park. There's land to do a playground. We possibly could do it. It means having to deal with conservancy lands and talking to them. But I think there's a larger issue that somehow we have to look at the whole city. And if we really want something that's a park, not just a playground, do we make a statement? It's not our decision, but at least say that we believe that somehow as the Parks, Recreation, Forestry Commission, that we need a more comprehensive thing. And we would like to look at the totality of Site 2 and Site 4 as a way to develop.
I agree. I think
whoever's going to have to fight those battles and make those decisions.
Giving Site 4 a look and see what could be done would be awesome. But I'm also just wondering, just going to shoot this out there. Is there any way you can incorporate some of the railroad track and like maybe a little pump thing where kids have to pump each other up and down the track or something where they can
have you not talked about liability yet? I don't think we're going to get recreational immunity for. What was this? What is this Saturday morning adventure with the guy tying the woman to the railroad tracks? What's that?
It's probably no worse than a zip line, you know.
True. All right, I'll be quiet now.
So
I realize the bowl of number 4 makes it difficult for a playground, but I think the size of the playground where it is works. I personally like the idea of looking at 2 and 4 as a potential, and at least saying that we maybe as a committee, we can't decide, but that would be a recommendation I would certainly approve of, to say, let's see if we can't take a little more comprehensive look at both those spots.
And I just want to point out one thing that we hear typically in playground design, that I think everybody, obviously we've identified that there isn't a great solution here. And this is something we're gonna have to live with, but parents really like when the younger kids and older kids can play on the same playground, because it's less work for the parents from a supervision standpoint, and that this will create a challenge for parents with kids wanting to play at different sites here. And it's still the best probable solution we have. I just wanted to make people aware that that's probably going to be a concern that we just have to live with at this location.
Well, instead of the pump track, we have a beer cart on the train tracks for the adults. And yeah, I know, I hear you.
So Matt,
Other comments, thoughts, Sue?
Matt, I'm wondering if you have a picture of Site 4 that we could look at?
I can pull it up here real quick. Hang on, just bear with me one moment.
That's a nice little site, but it's very much a hillside. Almost no
It's limited,
flat.
but we all know that everywhere in Middleton is limited, and we really can't fault the residents that live there because it wasn't their decision for the developer not to allocate land, and they moving to Middleton and paying Middleton taxes for the amenities and schools that Middleton offers. So we have to do something.
And we have to remember that Site 4 is still like a bowl, and it still collects water, and
right.
We have to deal with that.
So you're suggesting this is the skating rink that we've long needed?
Yeah.
Like, you know, I would have at the top, the higher elevation in 4 is no different than the elevation of 2. So I'm not sure that 2 is going to collect less water than 4 will. I'm not sure. I didn't have my surveyor transom when I went out there. Matt, were you going to try to find a picture or something?
Yeah, I've got it. Hang on. Can you see my screen now, the map?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the cursor, I think this is the kind of Site 4 that we've discussed, and then putting that in perspective with Site 2. Site 2 is this area here. So they are, I think it's about 400 lineal feet between the two. So it's not out of the realm that this could work. But I think as you get closer to the parking ramp, you can see this is almost a fairly wet, probably consistently wet area as you get closer to that ramp.
Well, my sense is the path is probably 10 feet lower than the dirt by the side of the parking ramp. So it does slope to that west down there like that.
Yeah, I mean, so part of this too, you know, we need to, there needs to be a lot of coordination because this is part of the stormwater utility issue.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going through that process, the reconstruction process now. So that whole area is going to get regraded, I guess is the best way to describe it. So just because it looks this way right now doesn't mean it's going to stay that way.
They're already doing it today. When I went out there, they had all.
Are they? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, they're going to be pulling the banks back to get the channel in there corrected. So
You know,
you may not even be able to do anything as you get closer to the creek.
we threw off section 3 for some reasons I don't quite remember, but I still now look at area 2 and area 3 are right across on the same side of the street, and while the stream is between them, there's a.
I think
I can't
the
remember what
challenge
was
with
the issue
site,
behind why we just ignored that spot.
because it's got a land value of $233,000, and I was trying to avoid
Council.
a major expenditure in
Yeah,
acquiring property.
Right. Other comments? I mean, I can't summarize, but I think there's a need for something. And personally, I think that location 2 for a playground rather than a park is still a good start. And it can be done as a playground, and it's right next to a large number of residential spaces without crossing any streets. I do think the need for a larger park and more space is critical. And I think that I personally could say I strongly approve putting a playground at spot 2, but we have to look at the potential of expanding for more park space into section 4 and let that go where it needs to go.
So can I, if I can, and I know Kathy has her hand raised and wants to speak too, but if I could go first, John.
Sure.
It'd be my suggestion, typically how we do the playgrounds is we throw this out to the playground vendors and ask them to come back with proposals. And what I think the best route here is to hire a landscape architect and have them design what we want and allow for some more creativity, because what I've seen with the playground vendors when we put it out is they try and put their best-selling, most popular that fits our budget, and it's all ends up kind of looking the same, and nobody takes any I guess daring risks with doing something different. And just because of the uniqueness here, I'd like to propose that we hire a landscape architect to come up with a design that maybe there's a way that through the design could tie these two locations together, and that we figure out what's reality and realistic before we try and go to present something to Conservancy Lands, and maybe even the portion that is site 4 is more nature-based play elements that may tie in more so with Conservancy.
What would you expect the cost of an architect to be? Is this something Blake could do, or under an existing framework, or is this something we have to come back?
No, it's something Blake is willing to put a proposal together, and he said he's done a couple of these that he referenced recently with some other communities, and they range in the $5,000 to $7,000 range.
All right,
to do the design.
I just want to make the comment on site 3. I know you said it was like $250,000, but there's a development that the Kramer is trying to do. And if we're trying to get away or from the fees in lieu of, would this be something we could steer them towards acquiring?
Developers not, it depends on, you got to remember what the trade-off is for them, right?
Right.
They have to dedicate land or fees in lieu of so much per unit, right? And I don't even remember if is there a requirement for commercial space? I don't know if there is.
There's not.
Pardon me?
Not for commercial.
Yeah. So I mean, it depends on what Kramer's building. And I, from a developer's perspective, I wouldn't buy a piece of property to donate it. If I'm going to buy a piece of property, I'm going to develop it and max out whatever profitability I have.
Right, but we as a city, I don't know, I thought we had more of a, we could say, instead of the fees in lieu of, we are asking for land like we're doing with Bruce.
Well, that's a negotiating standpoint, but yeah.
I just want to put it out there that maybe we have to think bigger. So
no, and Kathy, I mean, just so you're aware, that's a lot of the discussion that we've had here about when we did our comprehensive plan, was we recognize the fact that we're letting developers off easy in terms of dedication fees,
right,
instead of property, right? So we're probably at a net deficit for land, and this is really, I mean, what this comes down to is how much does the council want development at the risk of not having parks? And up until now, it's been more, yeah, we'll take the development and figure the parks out later. And that still might be the right answer, is just to put more money into the existing parks. Okay. But, we have a vocal proponent here that's I think, driving this train almost to the absurd lengths, right? I acknowledge that we probably need something. Just our choices are so limited.
Well, but that's why I come back to, I think I support what Matt was saying, is that the message is we want to look at a playground, and when we feel the need to expand that space to go broader than just simply the little square playground, and the message goes out that let's start and look at a plan and get a plan that focuses on the playground and how it can expand out if possible, and send that message out to whoever's listening, to council, whatever. It's not making a decision. It's saying we critically think there needs to be more than this eighth of an acre playground. I don't know the proper way to do that. I don't but I think that it's,
No, I think you're right. I think that what we should say is that, you know what, we should develop site 2, but we should also look at site 4 for
Yeah.
what's feasible,
okay.
right? It's not as attractive as 2. There are limitations with both sites. And both sites in combination are not going to fulfill what should be out there. But the
Right.
reality is there's nothing out there.
Okay, so why don't you make a motion to that effect?
I don't think Matt's asking for that. What he's asking for is for, I think what he's asking for is permission to get a landscape engineer or landscape architect out here to tell us what's feasible in either one or both of these spots.
Well, as long as it's in the minutes and it's very clear that I think that we're looking at 2 and 4 as a potential. And that 2 is just not enough, but you know, let's see what we can get. So that's the only reason I suggested a motion is a motion of support or something.
Well, instead of doing it that way, maybe the motion should be that, well, actually, it's not on the agenda. So can we ask you to do this?
Yeah, I don't know.
The concept of having a
enough
landscape architecture on to do work for us is not on the agenda.
But you could direct me to solicit that proposal and bring back to a future meeting.
Okay,
I
I'll
wasn't-
make that motion to do that.
Okay.
To look at some either 2 by itself or 2 in combination with 4.
All right, that's a motion. Do we have a second?
I would second that.
All right, thank you, Aaron.
What the motion is to do what?
Just to solicit proposals from a landscape architect
To
to sketch out what's feasible from a park perspective.
And looking at 2 with the potential of 4 as well.
Well, yeah, and I thought Matt said that the landscape architect was going to try to tie the 2 together.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then we kind of need them together and not just one.
It may not be feasible, right?
Yeah, I think at this point, the motion is to seek out advice from a landscape or architect.
Right. There are a
Okay.
lot of creative solutions they can come up
Right.
with.
I mean, you know, the reality is if we can make site 4 a park, if you don't have any, if you don't have a low, or if you have a high threshold for spending money, right? If you throw enough money at this, you can make anything a park.
Yeah. Well, David, you're on the land. you're on the-
Conservancy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I speaking for myself, I can't speak for anybody else, obviously. I certainly would be happy to look at any site and look at its own merits and determine whether it makes sense to try to turn it over and potentially become a park. I think it just makes sense to consider possibilities.
All right. Well, I think that's what we're looking at with Mark's motion is we're officially asking to seek options.
Right.
Yeah. Aaron, all right.
Was there a
Any
second
other
to-
discussion on the motion?
Well, the first question I have is, did someone second the motion? Aaron?
Yeah. Aaron.
Thank you.
That's why we're discussing it. Any other motions to give Matt more work? All right, I'm hearing no other discussion. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. The motion carries. Thank you, Matt. So please bring that back at your earliest opportunity. Moving on to the next item is about the splash pad. You said you're asking for direction. I'm not sure what that means.
Well,
Turn right and then turn left.
so the guidance that we have from the Wisconsin Department of Agricultural Trade and Consumer Protection says that splash pads should be staffed by an on-site attendant to monitor use, and that travel through a splash pad should be done so as to maintain 6 feet of social distancing. What I'm telling you is that none of our peer communities or none of our neighbors are planning to staff their splash pad. And looking for your feedback on, I think we need to open the splash pad. I think the demand is there. I think there are going to be plenty of people upset that we open the splash pad and that there will be concerns about social distancing. And again, the pandemic has proven to be a 51-49% discussion on all topics. It seems like that there isn't a lot of, everyone's got their own opinions, and it's going to be a situation where if we're open, we're going to have people upset because we've had people upset and calling that people aren't social distancing on the trails and people aren't wearing masks and aren't being respectful on the trails, and that we need to close more of the parks and conservancies because people aren't following the guidance. And if we don't open the splash pad, we'll probably have people marching on City Hall demanding that the splash pad open. So I want to be prepared that we're probably going to have people concerned, but I also don't see any way that we can staff the splash pad and expect that be a successful venture or a pleasant job opportunity for someone.
All right, Aaron, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, I know we definitely don't have the paid staff, but is this something where you could take volunteers? Because as a parent with 3 children that want to use this splash pad, I'm all in favor of opening it up, but I also understand the concerns, much like, you know, the distancing with shelter rentals. So if there's any opportunity for volunteers, I would be first in line to help out with that. And I'm sure there's plenty in the community that would as well.
The first concern I have is that typically in a situation like this, the first thing volunteers are going to say is, no one respects our volunteerism or the, how do we have more authority to enforce the rules? And I think you're going to set volunteers up to fail just as much as it would be a miserable experience for any staff.
Yeah.
Well, I've done plenty of volunteering, so I guess I'm volunteering with the knowledge that I know how it goes, but putting it out there as a possibility to bridge the gap.
At this point, we're planning on opening the pools. Is that correct?
Correct. With much of the same
restrictions,
kind of revised operational structure as last summer because of how well it worked, and that you know, at this point, Rebecca has no plans to open concessions, is not planning to put out the deck furniture. So a lot of the same kind of changes in how the pool operated last summer are planning to be in effect this summer as well.
Well, what happens to people if they violate the rules at the pool?
The difference is it's a staffed environment where, you know, I don't know that we're kicking violators out, but we're asking people to follow the rules. And I don't know that we had issues with that last summer.
There weren't really any issues with the pool. I mean, we used it, our family, multiple times. They have the one-way traffic. All the staff are very clear, like you leave and you're not coming back in. So it's more of a contained environment. With the splash park, it's come and go. So that's a little bit more difficult.
Well, that's where I was going. The only way you can make this thing work is to put some type of temporary fencing around the splash park, right? And to give it the appearance of a controlled environment. And I don't know that that's really viable either.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, Mark. I mean, gosh, it would have to be something remotely stable too to keep people out. Just put
to me, in some ways, fencing our splash pad limits the capacity of it even more, because you see kids kind of run off and run out in the green space and come back in, and it almost allows for, in its current environment, for more kids to be on the splash pad.
Yeah, you know, as you look at the splash pad, you look at the playground right next to it. That playground also, the play structure gets full of kids. You know, we could put the signage up, but you know, if we're going to control the splash pad but not control the playgrounds, how well is that going to sit with people? That's kind of in my head, because you know, I sit there and you can, you know, say we're not going to have the splash pad open or we're going to really control it, but how much different is it really than having the big play structures, open as they are?
One of my concerns is the amount of daycares and summer camps that come out. And if we get, more than one of them on site, we're going to have problems. And I don't know if it's a monumental task to try and, work with them to limit when they're coming and try and schedule it. But I also think it might be our best chance of success.
So
it
what
almost sounds like you prefer not to open it at all. and that's, we're at a point, right? We're also talking 2 months away. Or when would you open this? First, second week in June?
No, we open the Friday of Memorial Day weekend.
So we're a month away. The real question is the COVID situation expected to get considerably better in a month? And I understand that the kids are not going to get vaccinated, but one of the rationales behind opening the pools last year was that my recollection is that there just didn't appear to be the amount of spread in a chlorinated water environment.
Right.
Well, the reality is that they're using not super chlorinated, but they're using drinking water here, right? Which is chlorinated. I get I don't know where I'm going with this. What it sounds like is we should probably just discuss not opening up the the splash pad because it's not feasible.
I would disagree though. I think we have to find a way to open it. I understand the challenges, but if everywhere around us is doing it, we really encourage people to not visit Middleton by taking away one of our amenities for the summer. So.
Well, I agree with what Nick was saying. For example, the playground structures down there are crawling with kids. And they're in much closer contact than they would be on the splash pad. So for me, I would say I would like to see I would prefer to see the splash pad open, but I don't feel the city can take on the babysitting role or the role of monitoring how many little kids are running around the splash pad. I mean, it seems just you couldn't do it. And as far as volunteers are, I'd rather stick my head into a hornet's nest than to volunteer there. That's on you. If you want to do that, I'm all for it, but you're going to get your ears pinned back. Anyhow, I'm of the opinion that we should go ahead and open without restriction and not staff or attempt to staff the splash pad, period.
Well,
Jim, you're going to find challenges no matter what. I mean, I watched just this past weekend at Lakeview, a family hang a piñata to that tree right adjacent to the little covered area. Splash pad and about 30 of them sitting there and swinging at a piñata like it's, you can only do so much, and those who are truly not comfortable with the gathering will choose to go other places, but I am in full support of opening this, and if we can't staff it with volunteers, then I guess it doesn't need.
I would only take issue with Jim that I think that we should put constraints on it. We just don't police the constraints.
Right. Yeah.
We just say nothing. There you go. You're on your own. Have fun. I don't think that's a good statement from the city. But the idea of having signage and asking people what to do and putting up a set of rules and guidelines and then allowing people to try to obey it or what, that to me is where I would go in the middle of this.
Yeah, I would agree, John.
So let's play devil's advocate with that just for a minute. what happens when the health department comes and says, hey, these kids are not maintaining social distance? Will they shut the place down?
Well, they might, and maybe that's a risk. That's a worthy risk.
I mean, that's really that's the downside, right? Is that someone complains to the health department comes out and they say, you're not maintaining the users are not maintaining distance. There's no control over who's in there and what. Then we just need to shut the whole thing down.
Right. But that's the same risk we're running as we discussed last meeting with renting out any of our shelters and
right.
That liability. It's really, we control people. We can only put the guidelines in there, and
the difference is that they're paying for the shelters, right? So they have a vested interest in maintaining the guidelines. Here, it's just a free for all for the most part. And I certainly understand the desire of kids to be in water in the summertime, but you know, I don't want to create these expectations that this is going to be open all summer, where if we don't staff it and we don't control it somehow, we really do run a real risk of having the health department, Dane County Health, coming and saying, hey, you're not doing these things, you can't operate this splash pad.
Matt,
which I'm sure is the same risk that the other guys are running too.
Right. So question though, I mean, like, are they going to come and give you a warning, or would they just slap a fine on the city? Because if it's...
I don't, so and this is all just in hearing discussions over the multiple meetings with public health that we've had, is unless you have a situation where somebody's just vehemently opposing, like if the city was saying, you know, we're not going to enforce social distancing, we're not going to put any signs up, and it's fair game. I think at that point, then we could be looking at monetary fines. But if we're expecting, you know, if we've got signage in place and are trying to, they may come and close it if it's a consistent known issue. But I think that there would probably be discussions with us prior to that.
Right. And that, I think, yeah, we open it, and if it comes to that, then it's a different discussion.
Yeah, I mean, opening it and having it shut down is no worse off than having it shut down.
Right. So,
I mean, in that sense, you could also, I think you could put up signage that says, here's the guidelines and restrictions, and if the people consistently not following these, we may be forced to shut this down. And, you know, put a little threat in there, I guess, a little polite threat.
a well-worded threat, right?
We told you so, you know?
Yeah, I would agree with John. I would.
Yeah. And this is a pretty easy one to control, because all you have to do is turn the water off.
Yeah.
Right.
The challenge in a park shelter, if we have a problem, is if we get shut down in a park shelter, the next weekend somebody's got it reserved and has family planning on coming to a park shelter, and if we can't make it available, then that's really unfortunate. And that's why it's so critical that, you know, everybody kind of does the right thing. So
Kathy, did you have something? Your hand's up.
Yeah.
No, Kathy.
Oh.
No.
Oh, I do. I would like to
take your
see.
hand down. Jim, you had something to say.
I did, John. I don't want to suggest that we don't have some signage. Your point, I think, is absolutely correct. I was just thinking in terms of fencing or counting people in and counting people out, and any kind of an active attempt to monitor it. I just don't see that as being successful. But the signage, you know, absolutely. I think that's.
I agree. I didn't know how to interpret what you said, but I think I'm hearing a general consensus that we should put signage up, but not necessarily keep it closed.
Yes.
And that we don't want to be in the business of enforcing. Sue, go ahead.
You know, the pool was open last year, and it was it was successful because there was a good plan and a good structure around it. I don't see where the splash pad, well, we know there's not a structure around it, and it's hard to enforce any plan. And last year the splash pad was closed. I think we could keep it closed again this year. I really do feel uncomfortable with the idea of busloads of children coming in for an afternoon and just, have hundreds of children in close existence with each other. I'm not real comfortable with that.
Matt, is there any way to put that on the city's website in regards to use of the splash pad as far as large groups coming in, just to give direct language?
We can put anything we want, but stopping them is a whole nother challenge.
Right, I completely understand that, but
Having been a day camp provider a long time ago, these are valuable trips that get the kids out of their normal routine and give them something to look forward to during the week. And yeah,
I don't think we'd have the flocking issue we would have had for last season, I guess is the point I'm trying to make, because if all the neighboring communities are opening their splash pads, it's not going to be in the area like Sauk City that I took my kids to last summer.
Anyways, Matt, you were looking for directions. I presume you've gotten the direction you need, or some sense you need more.
what I've heard is we should open and get signage up and try and make the best of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want a motion on that, Matt, or is this just advisory or direction for you?
I wouldn't mind having a motion, but I understand if you don't want to make one too.
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion that we open the splash pad. What is it? Weekend of Memorial Day?
You can just say normal, per normal operation.
With the proviso that it be signed as a request to follow social distancing rules.
I would second that.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed?
Aye.
Sue, you're opposed. Was there a second opposition?
Was it Mark?
I'm Mark, so Mark and Sue. Okay,
Got 5-2 on the approval.
all right. All right, moving on to the last agenda item, number 6, request for portable toilets.
You know, I'm going to make a motion to pull this off. I didn't realize it was that expensive to use the facilities. Could you put this in instead of and to also defer this until the budget cycle and put it in there for next year?
So one consideration that was raised by this item was the idea of the city purchasing porta-johns. And it's something that I've started to put some thought in. The return on the investment is actually, I think there's a lot of merit in looking at it, but it's obviously, whole discussion would tie very well into waiting till budget time to try and make any determination.
All right. So Mark, what's your motion again?
It was essentially to defer this until the budget cycle.
All right, is there a second to that?
I'll second that.
All right, thank you. So a second, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. Motion carries. That's the end of our meeting. Any other new business or old business?
I do have one thing, Matt, and this is, it's not necessary for parks because of where it is, but Common Grounds is going to be under construction soon, which is going to displace, what, 30, 40 cars. Have you talked with Conservancy Lands about putting a temporary parking lot across the street? I just know from, just from looking at it over the weekend, almost every spot in that lot was full.
There's 50 spots over there.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to cause problems once they fence that off and start construction. So the sooner they get a sense of how they want to manage that, I think the better everybody's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I think it's a valid discussion. I think there's a lot of things that need to be discussed in the city providing a temporary public lot. And getting some direction from the attorneys on what our legal responsibility is in a situation like that in terms of ADA and other concerns.
So I would make that, ask for that referral to CLC.
All right, is that a motion?
It has to be, yes.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, David, thank you. A discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, motion carries. Any other business? All right, hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. And a second, fast.
Second.
Second, okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Thank you all. See you in a couple of weeks. So.
Aye.
Good.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.